Good afternoon, councillors, and welcome back to the meeting. Right, next item on the agenda is the Comrie Flood Prevention Scheme 2020, and I will invite Peter Dixon, Housing and Environment, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. I'm not muted. This report provides an update on the progress of the Comrie Flood Protection Scheme and proposes that the Council takes a preliminary decision under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act to confirm the proposed scheme without modification. The Council's duties with regard to flooding are set out within the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009. The Council published its first local flood risk management plans in June 2016 and followed up with the publication of an interim progress report in March 2019. The provision of a flood protection scheme at Comrie is included on the national priority list and is one of the key actions within the Tay local flood risk management plan. Now, Comrie is located at the confluence of three large rivers, the Water Rookhall, the River Erne and the River Leadnock, and has been badly affected by flooding in the past, most notably in 2012. The Council carried out some emergency flood protection works in 2013 on the Water Rookhall, but more requires to be done. The proposed flood scheme therefore includes approximately 2.8 kilometres of new flood walls and embankments intended to reduce the risk of flooding in the future. The proposed flood defences will be located on the three rivers as set in Appendix A of the report, and the works will include the associated public utility diversions, riverbank erosion protection measures and landscaping. Since our last report to the Environment, Enterprise and Infrastructure Committee in September 2017, plans for the flood scheme have taken a significant step forward. The outline design of the scheme has been developed and has been the subject of extensive consultation with the community. The scheme notice was formally published under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act in February 2020 and received 2 objections. Officers have had discussions with the 2 residents, but at this time their objections have not been withdrawn. A summary of those objections and the Council's response has been set out in Appendix B of the report. So the decision before Council today is essentially about the statutory process set out in the Flood Act and taking a preliminary decision to confirm the flood scheme without modification. This will allow the flood scheme to be referred to the Scottish Ministers, who will decide whether they wish to call the scheme in for a public local inquiry or refer it back to the Council to hold a local authority hearing. In either event, this will lead to the consideration and determination of the objections and will result in the Scottish Ministers or the Council making a further final decision on the scheme. Subject to that final decision, the Council will then be in a position to complete the detailed design of the scheme, move into the procurement phase and to commence its construction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And got a question from Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I ask not just as a Stratharn councillor, but also I think we should realise this is one of the most important capital projects for Perth Kinross over the next 2 to 3 years, perhaps even 4. Clearly, this was one delay that was always a possibility, and so hopefully the 2 project objections can be resolved. However, if that doesn't happen, what I'd like to ask Peter and with the project team, what do you anticipate as being the maximum delay that could occur if there was a public local inquiry or a local authority hearing?
Thanks, Councillor Donaldson. That's quite a difficult question to answer because essentially the process is out with the Council's hands. Obviously we'll have to first go to the Scottish Ministers and they could take time to respond, and then the process for either a local inquiry or the local authority hearing is not clear how long that would take. So it's difficult to answer. I think we said in the committee report that it would be difficult to try and ascertain how long this might take. Hopefully it's maybe a few months, but we just don't know at this point, so it's difficult to give you a definitive answer on that.
Could I just ask as a supplementary? I understand, I appreciate the difficulties. In the paper though, you stated if matters could be resolved, construction is anticipated to commence in early 2022. There's steps to go before we can get to that point. When do you anticipate, if the position can be resolved, that the project could be completed?
Again, that is difficult to answer because we don't know how long the statutory process will take now.
No, I was saying if you assume that matters could be resolved right now, how long would the project take from early 22 to completion?
I think what we're talking about is a period of about 18 months for construction. So I think what I'm saying is it's difficult to know if that'll still commence in early 2022. But once we do get underway, we're anticipating a period of about 18 months to complete the works.
So not being alarmist, but it's not impossible to project now. If there are appeals and it has to go through due process, it may not be until 2024 before the project is finally completed. Would that be right?
Potentially, yeah. Hopefully it won't take that long.
Yeah.
But that is a potential outcome, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anderson, you have a question? You need to unmute your button, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson? He's shaking his head. Councillor Anderson, unmute your button. Right, that's it. Councillor Anderson, having difficulty unmuting the button here. Councillor Anderson, are you not able to?
Is that it unmuted
yes,
now?
That's it now, yes.
Thank you. Yes, there's a terrible problem getting it to unmute.
Right, okay, that's fine.
It goes back on. If I'm still here, the question is, how many landowners is involved and you require access to the property, and is any of the objectors actually landowners that you would require access to? That's my first question.
I can't give you a number of how many landowners, Councillor Anderson. I'm not sure of the exact number. It's something of the order of, it's more than 50, I know that, because we're in quite a number of gardens, etc., are working on the boundary of properties. So difficult to give you an exact number on that. And yeah, but obviously the works are on the boundaries of those properties, so a small amount of work will have to be done in those properties. But the Flood Act gives us the power of entry onto land to carry out the flood prevention operations, basically.
Thank you. I've got another question, but before that, can I have a wee follow-up to that one? Knowing how things went in Ammon Bank, have you got a dedicated liaison officer that will work between the contractor, the council and the owners? And is he in place?
No, it's a bit early for that because once we get through the statutory process that we're dealing with at present, we're then into detailed design. But we certainly have that as a part of the plan for the construction works when we eventually get onto that, because that's quite a good idea, yeah.
Yeah, I'll make a comment on that. Have we secured government, Scottish government or UK government finance for flood protection? And if this delay causes additional financial impact, will there be more from the government, or will the council have to invest more money into this scheme?
Yeah, we're currently already in receipt of capital grant for the scheme. All the schemes that are on the national priority list attract capital grant at the moment. So we're certainly getting that. That funds the cost of the scheme up to 80% of its cost. And we do an annual return to the Scottish Government. So if there are additional costs that are coming out of the current process and the current delay due to COVID-19, then we would just simply report those to the government. Having said that, though, the stage that we're at, which is really just in the statutory process at the moment, I don't think COVID-19 is really causing us too many problems just now. that's just a happy kind of coincidence because of the stage that we're at.
Can I follow on from that then? Does that mean you got additional money at Almond Bank when it overran? Because I thought, I understood that it came out of the council, the overrun at Almond Bank, or is that a different scenario?
It's a different scenario. The Almond Bank scheme was done under the old grant system, and the Scottish Government have since updated that. So we're basically under new rules now. So the 80% grant is payable up until the point where the council has tender prices for the main construction works, and the project costs are sort of frozen at that point. So we're still not at that yet, so we can still report our costs to the Scottish Government, even if they change.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Harry Coates, I believe you've got a question you would like to ask about this. I think we'll just have to leave that at the moment. There seems to be a bit of a problem, which is a bit unfortunate. If there are no more questions, can I ask Councillor Lyle to move this report, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Just before I move it, just on a comment, given the nature of the objections, I would have said that although we've now moved into the world of virtual meetings because of COVID-19, no one has as yet come up with a virtual flood barrier. So by necessity, the flood barrier will be a physical barrier, and that needs to be recognised by all the people in Comrie, including the objectors. Also, just as a comment, if there's an inquiry into this and there's an appeal, if the appeal is upheld, then the flood barrier may never be built, sharing Councillor Donaldson's negativity about the future prospects of it. Anyway, in summing up, I would say that the flood protection scheme is of critical importance to the Council's flood risk management plans, and it's both nationally important and very important in a local sense. The community of Comrie has been badly affected in previous years, particularly in 2012, and I witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by the floods in 2012. The council officers have worked closely with the local community to develop the proposals as they stand for the moment. This has included a public exhibition, a good deal of face-to-face meetings and liaison with the community, and the publication of a public consultation report on the proposed scheme. Only 2 objections to the proposed scheme were received, which is a testament to the extensive public consultation carried out by the council throughout Comrie. As those objections still remain in place, I would therefore propose a motion to the council to support this paper and recommend making a preliminary decision to confirm that the proposed flood scheme go ahead without modification. This will allow the scheme to progress to the next stage of the statutory process. Thank you. Happy to move the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Ros McCall to second it, please.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. The Comrie Flood Prevention Scheme is wanted, is needed and is essential. The unique convergence of the watercourses in Comrie has seen cascades of water flooding down and ruining belongings, homes and history. If the waterfall hits with increased rain as a result of global warming, the chances of this are enhanced. Comrie can go from one of the most stunning and picturesque small towns in the world to underwater chaos affecting over 200 properties and many, many more lives. The council has worked exceptionally hard and engaged with the community at every stage of this project. And if we're going to avoid a repeat of scenes experienced in 2012 and 2015, then the sooner this scheme is approved and built, the better. I'm delighted to second this paper, and I look forward to the people of Comrie getting the flood protection scheme they want and they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lane, you wish to comment?
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Provost. Just something that Councillor Lyle said, I've never could put negativity in this scheme and Stuart Donaldson in the same sentence. Stuart Donaldson's been driving this forward within our group, proponent, taking a massive interest in it, and he's made us all aware of how important it is for the area. So I can't accept negativity in Stuart Donaldson over this scheme at all. My other comment is really to, I'm really glad that the council is working very hand in glove with the community up to this point. Having borne the scars along with Councillor Anderson and Councillor James and Jarvis, and maybe yourself, about the Ammon Bank scheme, I hope that we continue to work extremely closely with them when the building phase starts, and we need to have one point of contact with the community, and not have multiple subcontractors who nobody takes responsibility for when things are going wrong. So that's my ask moving forward, and hopefully this well-deserved and needed scheme will progress quite quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Lane, for your comments. Councillor Donaldson.
He's muted.
You're muted, Stuart.
Can you get me now?
That's it, thank you.
Okay. I was just going to say that Councillor Lang has almost taken the words right out of my mouth about negativity. I'm not really quite sure what Councillor Lyle is driving at, because it is an issue I've tried to be on top of almost since the day I was elected. I've no doubt, Councillor, that the flood prevention team, flood protection team, have engaged in very extensive consultation with the local community. I compliment them for that, their exhibitions, their newsletters and the like. All I was trying to do is, this delay has always from day one been a possibility. I hope it can be resolved, it doesn't happen, because I really want to see this scheme and the defences, especially against the Rúchal. And I think if you know that bit of the world, you know, when water cascades down from Glenartney and then down into the Arn, it really causes absolute havoc. So we want to get this completed as soon as possible. But what I was trying to find out is, with the process, if there is appeals and then hearings, is just how long it might take. And I think people should be aware of that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Anderson. He's also having major problems with his microphone. I think we need to ask him to put his question or comment in the chat box, or maybe come back to him. Try Councillor Brock.
Hi, Deputy Provost, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
I fully support this, and you know, and having been a councillor from 2012, when this was the first part of the flooding in August, and then they sustained it again in November, it was devastating to the community. And yeah, I'd really like to thank Craig McQueen and Peter Dixon for the amount of work that they've done and carrying out on the consultations within the public, and especially within the community of Comrie. And I really hope that this goes ahead and the two objections can be, you know, come to a resolvement on them, because we do not wish to ever see this happen again in our area. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brock. Councillor Anderson, I think we still are having difficulties with your microphone, which is very unfortunate, but at the moment we have no one else wishing to make any comment. So can we agree this paper? And if Councillor Anderson's got any comments to make, I'm sure he can make it offline. So we're happy to agree this paper.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay. We agreed earlier today to hear the deputation, so we've got the deputation coming from SSE for this planning application, and it's here because it's of national importance, not just a local. So I'm not sure whether the deputation is there, so perhaps Scott Henry can let me know if the deputation is here.
Deputy Provost, if you just bear with us, we'll just try and get the deputation live.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for the technical hitches, but they are out with my control, absolutely. So we just have to bear with everybody this afternoon now.
You're entirely blameless, Deputy Provost. You're doing a grand job.
Thank you very much for your comments. Councillor Parrott, we agreed this morning to accept the deputation. That was one of the things we did earlier in the agenda. It seems a long time ago, but we did. There's nobody objected. We took that.
I was agreeing to the paper there.
Oh, I see.
Deputy Provost, just to let you know, that's the deputation now on the call. Okay.
Right. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming along to give us your deputation this afternoon from SSE. Perhaps you could tell us who you are, and then it'll be easier for us to know who we are addressing. Because if you could maybe introduce yourselves, please.
Sure thing. Thank you, Deputy Provost, members. My name's Tommy Hart, and I'm a Chartered Town Planner working for Scottish Hydroelectric Transmission.
No, they're not hearing me, and they're all the councillors are saying, "Oh, you know, you need to unmute your mic." Boom, boom, boom.
Excuse me. Sorry for the interruption there. Thank you for coming along this afternoon, and I'm sure you've been aware you're allowed given 5 minutes to give your presentation, followed by some questions from members if required. So if you would like to start your presentation now, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, I'm watching you on one screen, and there's a delay on my the phone there, so apologies if I'm a bit late.
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So I just wanted to run through a few quick points this morning in support of the application. Obviously, just start by saying that we at She Transmission are delighted to once again get the backing from the Planning Authority and the consultees on what is our fourth application on the site. And whilst the proposals haven't changed too much since 2012, there is now a real drive to progress these to construction, as I'll outline. The proposed development forms an integral part of the reinforcements to the transmission network to meet capacity demands in the east coast of Scotland. And these upgrades will take place in 2 stages. The first stage will include upgrade of the existing 275 kilovolt network to allow for early delivery of increased capacity, and the second stage is to further upgrade it to 400 kilovolt, and that's to facilitate further increased capacity on the network for new generation connections. The other works required for the substation, which are the new towers and realignment over the head line, have already been granted consent by the Scottish Ministers through our Section 37 application. and the upgrades to the overhead line works to 400 kV is due to be submitted later on this year. Just quickly to touch on the importance again, the transmission network, or the high voltage transmission network, is acknowledged in the National Planning Framework 3, and subsequently has been followed through into the draft National Planning Framework 4. And I think that just shows the importance of the development as one piece of the bigger picture. It obviously aligns with the green agenda that ourselves at SAC have, and I think that aligns with the Council's aspirations and also with the Scottish Government. Scottish Sheet Transmission, is the transmission holder in the north of Scotland, and we have a legal duty under the Electricity Act to develop and maintain an efficient, coordinated and economical system of electricity transmission. And in doing so, we must offer connections to transmission system, both for new generation and new sources of electricity demand. And this is the reason for the request to the overhead line and new substation across the country. So I won't go over too many details about the site. I'm sure Mr. Littlejohn will outline that. But it's just worth noting that we have had very close consultation with the planning officers and consultees, as well as members of the public. And on that regard, we did make some small changes recently to the site layout to ensure that there was no negative impact on local properties in terms of noise. And members will note that there have been no representations received from members of the public on any matter, but specifically on the noise. From an environmental point of view, we submitted an environmental assessment to support the application, and certainly should consent be granted and we go to implement in the near future, then any mitigation measures that have been proposed will certainly be put in place. One such measure that is being looked at the moment is the raptor purchase for the ospreys, and we currently have a pending application with Angus Council for 2 raptor purchase, which fall just out with the Perth and Kinross boundary, but immediately adjacent to the application site. And as I say, we're hoping to get that through planning in the next month or so. The substation will be unmanned, so I can confirm that access will be restricted to authorised personnel only, and on the same basis, any lighting for the site will be limited to only when people are in the buildings and are on the site, so it won't be lit 24/7. Construction is due to take place over about a 2 to 2.5 year period based on 7-day working. So just to wrap up very quickly, yes. What you have in front of you is a development which has raised no objections from consultees or members of the public, and obviously has an extant planning consent in place. We align with the local and national objectives related to reducing carbon emissions and the transition to net zero. And so taking account of what you've heard from myself and hopefully from the planners and what you've read so far, hopefully it gives members sufficient comfort to be able to approve our application. Many thanks for your time, and certainly welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. That was very good, very close to 5 minutes, so that was excellent. We have a question. Councillor Wilson would like to ask a question.
Thanks, Deputy Provost, and thanks for the presentation. That was helpful. 2 questions really. One is, how near are the nearest residential properties? It doesn't specify that in detail in our report. And also, given you mentioned about lighting, but is there security lighting and CCTV coverage at the installation once it's completed, in order to make sure that it's secure, since it's a part of the power infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take the second question first, if you don't mind. So, yes, there will be security lighting and there will be CCTV as well. I think the security lighting works on the basis of the operative goes into the site and will have to physically switch it on, or it may also be on the basis of sensors, but certainly, you know, just to confirm that the lights won't be on all the time. So obviously that was a big factor for us in terms of impact visually. In terms of the closest property, I can't remember specifically, but I think the closest one is certainly less than 100 metres from the substation. We've got Hawk End Farm, and I forget the other property's name, but we're certainly you know, no less than 100 metres or so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, do you have a question?
Thanks, Deputy Provost. A couple of questions. You said that the thanks for your presentation, by the way. Sorry, you said that the impetus was now to drive forward with the project, which has had extant planning permission for a number of years. The paper that the elected members will consider in a moment includes an extension of the planning permission for a 5-year period rather than the normal 3 years. I was just wondering, when are you actually planning to start construction? Why do you need, if you're pushing ahead with the project, why do you need an extension to the planning permission?
The planning consent that we have in place at the moment is that extension that you talk about there. At the time, as I understand it, there was a bit of dubiety over the project, and it has been the case since 2012. What we find in our business is that projects can drive forward, and then at the last minute they may fall off the to-do list and may well not proceed. But certainly the project that is proposed now, the reason that we have the new application was because it was materially different to the permission we have, and therefore we were required to submit a new planning application. And as I said, it is now our intention to, you know, should we have consent granted, it is our intention to proceed on the basis of the plans that you are considering today.
Proceed on the basis of these plans, but from what date? I mean, when are we talking?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the construction of the platform works is due to commence, I think, spring to summertime next year. But in advance of that, we will be looking to undertake the public road improvements, which we had consented through a separate application, and is a condition to this consent as well.
Okay, and my other question was just about, you said that there hadn't been any objections. I did attend the public consultation meeting that happened, trying to remember if it was earlier this year or at some point last year. My recollection is that there were a number of members of the public at the consultation meeting, local residents who were quite exercised. How did SSE draw together the comments that were made at the consultation meeting? What's the response to that consultation, and how has that informed the application going forward?
You'll note from the submissions that there's a what we call a PAC report. So essentially that outlines the consultation events that we undertook, or the event we undertook, the comments that were raised at that, and any feedback we have on that, and it also includes any changes that we're going to make on the basis of the comments. Off the top of my head, I can't remember any specific comments that were raised and any changes that were made. But as I alluded to in my my presentation at the start, certainly latterly, when we were aware of changes to our the transformers, which will sit on site, we were aware there was going to be a noise issue. So on that basis, we had to essentially turn the building, I think it was about 90 degrees round, and install noise barriers, or looking to install noise barriers to ensure that there'd be no noise impact on local receptors.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Deputy. And thank you, Mr. Harper, for the input there. At a long-standing site, well, the principle of the site being used for this purpose has been established for many years. The changes in this instance seem to be mainly technical within the site. The only thing I did notice, which might be significant, was the raising of the height from 13 to 14 metres. Would I be correct and say this 14 metres would be relevant to the gantries which are within the site? They appear to me to be the highest viewpoints, which I may or may not have an opinion on, looking at the various plans, etc.
Hello, are we still?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was a question in that. I'm seeing the councillor still speaking on the Teams thing.
Okay. Okay. Just I want clarity. Is it the gantries which are the highest element of the structures?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you very much for coming to give us the presentation and answering members' questions. I will now ask David Littlejohn, Head of Planning Development, to introduce the report.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. The report presented today for your consideration recommends the approval of an application for the installation of an electricity substation, supporting infrastructure and other associated works near Hoch End Farm, Meagle. The project is regarded as an essential part of the Keith to Kincardine 400 kilovolt reinforcement project, the overhead line elements of which have already been approved by Scottish ministers under Section 37 of the 1989 Electricity Act. The principle of this development is supported by the local development plan, and I would draw members' attention to paragraph 2.1 on page 35, which details the proposed development, and also to pages 40 to 45 of the report, which details the conditions attached to the granting of planning permission. Planning Officer Callum Petrie is also with me today, as are other officers, to answer any specific questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that. No one has indicated that they have any questions to ask. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stewart, you have a question?
Thanks, Deputy Provost. Sorry, I was just waiting for Mr. Littlejohn's introduction to the paper before I stuck my
yeah, that's okay.
Request for a question in. I'm just wondering, the deputation there, the gentleman said that we had there had been the public consultation and there was a PAC report. I don't see this attached as an appendix to the report before us, and I'm wondering whether it should be.
I think Callum is going to answer this question. Callum, are you there?
Good afternoon, Deputy Provost. Thank you for introducing me. Good afternoon, Councillor Stewart. In relation to the PAC report, as Mr. Tommy Hart pointed out, that is something that is a submission of the planning application itself. It's in the background submission detail, but it's not something that we would commonly include as an appendix to a committee report itself, but it is there in the background for public viewing.
That answer your question, Councillor Stewart?
I would have just assumed that a summary of the PAN or the PAC, whatever we call it, would have been appropriate to include, whether or not the full report, at least a reference to it so that we could find it.
Could I advise it's plan number 74 and 76 in the plan references?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. Sorry, Deputy Provost, I was getting back to planning mode there. The deputation mentioned that there's property, I think the farm, 100 metres away. Are we satisfied that there's sufficient mitigation in regard to noise and any other disturbance to that and any other residential properties that are nearby?
I presume Callum will answer this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for that question. On the back of that earlier question, I double-checked the distances, and I can advise that the red sightline boundary is within 100 metres of neighbouring properties, but the actual infrastructure itself, so we have Gamekeeper's Cottage, Hoch End Farm Cottage and Hoch End Farm itself. So the earth bunding works are approximately 100 metres from those properties. The infrastructure itself are closer to 200 metres, and there was a lot of discussion and consultation with our environmental health colleagues, as Mr. Hart pointed out, regarding the noise mitigation and the orientation of any noise generating equipment to make sure that was satisfactorily addressed, and we are comfortable with that approach and the associated conditions to cover that element off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. It was just to absolutely clarify the 5-year extension, and could I have just confirmation that will be till 2025 and not 5 years from 2023 to 2028?
Thank you again. Yep, thank you again, Deputy Provost. Yes, the extension of time that's requested, as correctly pointed out, or the question is posed, it would be from 2020 to 2025. That part of the justification in the extension of time as set out in the report was also to allow for the road widening and the other junction improvements that were required in relation to the access from the other planning application 1901-685, to which the access works relate. So the 5 years was considered reasonable to support in this case in order for those works to come forward at an earlier stage.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Just a very quick question to follow on from Councillor Wilson's question to Callum about the noise. These stations can often emit a low-level hum. Is there noise mitigation allowing for that as well? I presume it is, but if you're living nearby to something like that, it can start to play on you. I'm presuming that's been covered as well. Could I ask?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Braun, sorry. The low-level hum and all background noise has been accounted for in terms of the technical guidance by our environmental health colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for your questions and that the answers have been provided. Can I ask Councillor Lyle to move the report, please?
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. Happy to move the report. As Councillor Gray indicated earlier, this application is very similar to the one that was before us some years
ago.
Someone's muted me. Am I now unmuted again?
Yes, you're unmuted now.
Right. Councillor Gray indicated that we had a similar application some years ago, and I hope that we don't face a similar one in a few years' time, given that the 5-year timeline for this application is no guarantee of construction. So, but anyway, happy to move the paper as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'd like to thank Tom Hart for his presentation, the Head of Planning and Development, and his team for this comprehensive report, and I'm happy to formally second it.
Thank you very much. Any comments on this report from anyone? No, if there are no comments, we're happy to agree this report. Thank you all very much.
Agreed.
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 We now move on to paper 11, the final report of the Independent Inquiry into Mental Health Services in Teesside, Trust and Respect. So I invite Gordon Patterson, Chief Officer, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. This report advises members of the publication of the final report of the Independent Inquiry into Mental Health Services in Teesside on the response to the report's publication and on the action plan that has been drafted. Members of the Council will be aware that the previous interim chair of NHS Teesside, John Brown, commissioned this inquiry in 2018 following a number of critical reports, some very tragic events and a debate in Parliament. Dr. David Strang was then appointed to carry out the inquiry, and in February this year he published his final report. The final report is a difficult read as it highlights a number of areas where significant improvement is needed, many of which had featured for some time. These relate to strategic design, culture, leadership, communication. Perhaps most significantly, the report also highlighted a lack of engagement with key stakeholders, with patients, carers, staff and partners, which had led to a breakdown in trust and respect, hence the report's title. While the report was commissioned by NHS Teesside and the recommendations are principally for the NHS, Council will be interested in this report and the response because of Perth Kinross Council's strategic commitment to supporting people to lead healthy, independent lives, because we provide and commission social work services to people who have mental health problems, and because the most effective response to the findings in the inquiry will be delivered by collaborative working across the public partners in Teesside. This is why, in response to the publication of the Independent Inquiry report, the 3 Council Chief Executives, the Divisional Commander from Police Scotland and NHS Tayside's Chief Executive came together to form the Executive Partners to commit to work together to improve the quality, availability and responsiveness of mental health services across Tayside. The statement of intent of the Tayside Executive Partners is appended to this report. In addition, NHS Tayside have now appointed a new Director for Mental Health Services, Kate Bell, who, as well as having taken over some operational responsibility for inpatient services, will be leading on the development of a Tayside-wide mental health strategy. And along with a new project team, she's coordinated the production of the draft action plan in response to the Independent Inquiry report. And again, the action plan is attached as Appendix 2. Finally, it's important to note that the intention was to engage much more widely and to co-produce this action plan ahead of the Scottish Government's deadline of the 1st of June. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has significantly impacted on this, and hence the Minister for Mental Health agreed to accept a draft action plan, and that's what we've shared with members today, recognising that this is the first iteration and the action plan will be further developed in partnership over the coming weeks. I'd be happy to take any questions, Deputy Convener.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Deputy Provost, and thanks, Gordon, for the introduction. I've got 3 questions, one of which I think Gordon's touched on, and that is about capacity to deliver, because reading the action plan, 2 of the key players here were either an interim post or were given indication that they were to leave their post for the Health Board. But my question remains, do we consider that the Health Board and its partners have got sufficient capacity in terms of senior management and the will to move forward to deliver this to what is quite a tight timescale? I've got a question about the timescales at the moment. So that's the first question. I don't know if Gordon wants to answer that or the Chief Executive would want to come in. I'll ask them one at a time, Deputy Provost.
Thank you.
Deputy Provost, I'm happy to answer that. I think absolutely the will is there. There is absolutely no doubt about that. There's a very clear commitment. The Chief Executive of NHS Teesside has on a number of occasions articulated that this will become his, or this would have been his #1 priority had it not been for the impact of the pandemic, and it will be again. The contribution and participation of the Teesside Executive Partners recognises that we don't necessarily need a response that's a medicalised model, that recognises the whole system, that recognises the contribution of community partners, that recognises the role of the chief executives and the councils, as well as Police Scotland. Those partners will ensure that the will is maintained, the focus continues, and I'm sure we'll also be looking at the extent to which there is sufficient capacity to meet the ambitious deadline that's set. It's more likely, I would suggest, that the partners will look to bring in additional capacity rather than defer any of the deadlines because of the importance and priority that this has been given.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Second question, Deputy Provost. Gordon referred to timescales, and realistically, of course, some of these dates have passed and some of them are now are very soon. Gordon, do you envisage the whole process just moving forward by 3 months, or has there been sufficient early action on this for us to feel confident about it in the future, and what's the mechanism for rejigging the timescales?
So the action plan as drafted has now been submitted to government, and discussions are taking place regularly with government around the ambition that it sets out and the actions that are included. Inevitably, with 49 recommendations, actually 51 recommendations, but 2 of them are for government or national regulators, there is no real quick fix here. And when we look at some of the challenges that are outlined in the independent inquiry report around culture, governance, communication, leadership, there will be things that will take time to do well and to do effectively. And there is a very clear ambition that the criticisms about a lack of engagement with staff, with patients and carers will be addressed in the process that follows. So there may well be a refinement of some of the timescales, a reprioritisation as a consequence inevitably of COVID, because inpatient mental health services and community mental health services have been focusing very much on how we can mitigate the impact of the pandemic on patients, service users and carers. Those discussions will take place and will certainly be signed off by the Teesside Executive Partners, who are the overarching group that are progressing this work.
Thank you. And thirdly, briefly, do you consider that the IJB and the Council have enough leverage to make sure that the Health Board keep this at the top of their agenda?
I don't think that will be necessary. I think the Health Board are absolutely committed to this, and I think that's a matter of record and has been evidenced by the commitment and investment, the additional capacity that has been brought in. The IJB will certainly be minded to hold officers and statutory partners to account, particularly because Perth Kinross IJB continues to retain the responsibilities and duties in relation to the strategic planning and commissioning of inpatient mental health services. The council's involvement, I think, is key because what we need to do, and what with the support and assistance of the council we will be better able to do, is to take the focus away from the 66 beds that provide care and support and treatment to around 6% of people who have mental health problems, and shift the balance of care and shift that focus and investment into community services, so that we're doing much more about keeping people well, keeping people local, keeping people connected, rather than necessarily focusing exclusively, as much of David Strang's report does. Sorry, not exclusively, that's overstating it. A disproportionate focus has probably been brought to bear on inpatient beds, when we need to think about the community services that will prevent people from going into hospital and get them out of hospital as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. My question was about what additional resources are going to be put in to try and support community projects. Clearly, if you stay up in some of the more rural parts of my ward, your access to services is going to be quite difficult, and access to a community group who are delivering mental health services is also going to be restricted by geography. So I'd just like to know what additional resources are going to be put in there.
So we have, I mean, I think your question, thank you for your question, Councillor Williams. I think it's a very pertinent question, given we are trying to understand, trying to anticipate, trying to consider how we respond to the particular challenges that we're facing just now as a society, and the impact that this will no doubt be having on people's mental health, people who perhaps previously haven't had such issues, or who haven't perhaps come across services, who are struggling with isolation, who are struggling with physical distancing, who are not as connected as would otherwise be the case. So very much in the short term, the focus of our activity is to engage with local third sector providers to challenge them about what more can be done quickly, locally, in a responsive way, in communities to provide support to people who may have mental health problems. And we've built some provision in our mobilisation plan to invest in those services. And indeed, the material aspect of our mobilisation plan relates to the additional financial support that we may give to third and independent sector providers to ensure that they're sustaining the provision of services at this critical time. So that would be the sort of short-term response, and I'm very sensitive to recognising what you're saying about the need to ensure that we are tackling access deprivation, that we're recognising rurality, and that we're taking services to people. So we'll need to factor that in, and I can assure you that we will look at that in the context of any additional supports that we can commission over the coming weeks and months. In the more medium term, as well as the wider development of a Teesside-wide strategy, which Kate Bell, as the new director, is leading on, our intention is to develop in Perth Kinross a local community mental health strategy that reflects local conditions, local challenges, and identifies the local priorities and needs that we would wish to commission services to meet. We took a report on the progress in relation to the development of that community mental health strategy to the IJB in December, and we're due to report back in June, but for the reasons that we've already rehearsed, that might not now be till September or December, in the context of the focus that we've had to give to COVID. But certainly we're very keen to ensure that we are, whilst supporting a once for Teesside approach where that is the right thing to do, that we're not losing sight of the need to respond to the needs in our local communities in Perth and Kinross.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hearn.
Thank you. Prior to the Strang inquiry, the Perth and Kinross IJB agreed the mental health transformation programme. Is that being shelved? And if any parts of that had started, are they still continuing, or have they stopped as well?
Okay, so In January that year, before David Strang had undertaken his work, the Perth Kinross IJB agreed a plan that was to centralise mental health services in Dundee and learning disability services in Perth, because of the opportunity that presented to create centres of excellence, because of challenges around the Strathmartin estate, and because of workforce challenges, particularly in relation to clinical staff. That work was underway, and Councillor Ahern is correct, it hasn't progressed in view of David Strang's recommendation that we need to develop an end-to-end strategy before we start to move the bed bases around. Some of the arrangements have had to be made out of operational necessity, have involved some changes being made to where wards are sited or whether they're operating or not. But certainly within the context now of this new work and the response to David Strang's report, the intention would be to revisit the relevance, appropriateness, efficacy, affordability of that plan, without necessarily revisiting all the consultation and engagement that went behind it, to recognise that there was a lot of work done there, but to actually work out, and you're also right to point out the time that has lapsed since then, whether this remains the right thing to do in the context of the findings of David Strang's report and taking account of how we're going to be delivering services moving forward, some of which is obviously more recently impacted on by determination as to what the new normal is going to be like for the delivery of community health services and inpatient wards, given what we had understood would be the case with regard to physical distancing. So that work needs to be revisited. The work that has gone on in the meantime has been mostly around environmental improvements, pending those bigger changes, and addressing some of the challenges that had been identified previously in relation to health and safety, including in relation to fire risks and the removal of ligature anchor points from inpatient wards.
So would that need to come back to the Perth Kinross IJB, or are you doing it based on the decision made previously?
No, the IJB will need to have oversight on any decisions in relation to the strategic delivery of inpatient services, because that responsibility lies with them. There's a debate to be had around how the emerging, sorry, somebody's sharing their screen. There's a debate to be had around how the emerging work and the action plan and the governance structure and the role of the Teesside executive partners ensures that the locus of the councils and the locus of the IJB is recognised in the work moving forward. But at the moment, the integration scheme's very clear and there haven't been any changes to the provision. So the IJB would reasonably expect to be cited on, involved in and approving any plans moving forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reid, question please.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Afternoon, Gordon. Can I ask what progress has been made in addressing the really serious shortage of substantive consultant psychiatrists? Because without them in place, and significant numbers of them in place, mental health services cannot function adequately. The ramifications for training of general practitioners and community psychiatric nurses would be absolutely horrendous if we do not get a full substantive body of consultants in. And it's maybe not understood by the wider body just how important the GMC are in this role.
So thank you for that question. That is a critical aspect of some of the challenges that have faced us, certainly since I came into post 14, 15 months ago, but long-standing and wide-ranging challenges around the clinical workforce. There was and has been for some time an over-reliance on locum doctors, which comes with significant additional costs and a reduced continuity of care, because NHS Teesside has experienced difficulties in relation to recruiting consultant psychiatrists, and at one point had something like 11 vacancies out of 26 posts. That situation has slightly improved with the interim appointment of an associate medical director who's worked very closely to return people to work, to enlist the support of some consultant psychiatrists. But there are still significant vacancies. What we've then done, or what Mike Winter has then done as the associate medical director, has put some of the locum doctors on more established contracts and given them job plans that mitigate some of the challenges that can arise around continuity and consistency of service. NHS Teesside had applied to recruit consultant psychiatrists through international recruitment and was able to secure a couple of people who prior to COVID were coming to the UK to work in Scotland and for NHS Teesside. That hasn't been able to be realised. This though is a national problem, and it isn't a problem with a quick fix. So essentially what is now happening is services across the country, and particularly for the relevance of the council in Teesside, are looking at how you best deploy that limited resource most effectively. And the best way you do that is to have those consultant psychiatrists only do those tasks that only consultant psychiatrists can do. And you supplement that with advanced nurse practitioners and with other clinicians who can work alongside as part of a multidisciplinary team. So that's the approach that is being taken in anticipation that we can't design services around a workforce that we don't have. So we need to bring in new approaches and new workforce opportunities in order to try to mitigate that. It is also hoped, and I hope this isn't a false hope or a false optimism, that through the work of the Teesside Executive Partners, through the delivery of the action plan, through the response to David Strang's independent inquiry, the reputation and attractiveness of NHS Teesside as a place to work, if you have, if you're working in a mental health field, will be enhanced and will be better able to attract. Because at the moment, the reduced number of psychiatrists means it's very much a seller's market, and unfortunately, they may be less likely to come to Teesside because of some of the adverse publicity that we've suffered from.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'm very aware, looking at the British Medical Journal, that there has not been one advert for a consultant psychiatric job in Teesside in the last 3 months. Teesside is a wonderful place for people to live. We do need to be a wonderful place for them to work, and it can be.
Thank you very much for your comment and question, Councillor Reid. Councillor Stewart, you have a question?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Somebody will switch their microphone. Is that better? Good. Thank you, Chief Officer and Director, for your paper and for your introduction and the questions that you've responded to so far. A couple of times during your introduction, you referred to the new Director of Mental Health, Kate Bell, but I note that specifically in your paper, she is an interim director. In your response to Councillor Reid there, you were talking about the interim associate medical director. And one of the themes that you've reported on is, as one of the cross-cutting themes in response to the recommendations from the Strang inquiry, is about governance and leadership. Do you consider that, I've got a few questions by the way, so I'll come back after this one. Do you consider that in terms of leadership, if we are continually only making interim or part-time appointments to senior roles directing mental health within NHS Teesside, that has a knock-on effect on the ability to deliver on strategic and operational plans?
Sorry, Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes.
Mike Winters, the Associate Medical Director, came out of retirement to come in and support NHS Teesside and has made significant improvements and is continuing to do so with a commitment, I understand, to work with NHS Teesside for the foreseeable. Kate Bell was brought in from NHS Lanarkshire, where she had developed a mental health strategy with partners in the course of I think a 24-month period. A strategy and an approach that had been commended by the Scottish Government to NHS Teesside. So whilst Kate came in on the basis of developing that strategy, she has now been appointed to the director's post, albeit on an interim basis, to oversee the delivery of inpatient services operationally, as well as to work on the future development of the strategy and the action plan. As long as we can continue to bring in new people with fresh ideas who can provide challenge and creativity and innovation, I think we're in a good place moving forward. I'm neither the employer of those colleagues or able to necessarily comment on their ambition to stay longer or to commit for years to come. But absolutely, it would be ideal had we a full establishment of permanent staff. But the fact that we don't doesn't seem to me to be diminishing at the moment the significant focus and activity that is trying to turn this service around.
Okay, thanks for that response. I mean, I'm not questioning the ability or commitment of any of the people that you mentioned, but as you said in your summing up there, it is about the interim nature and the part-time nature in some cases of those appointments that I think it could be a concern. In the same paragraph in your report 2.3, and you touched on this as well in your either in one of the earlier answers or in your introduction. There's reference to the Teesside-wide mental health strategy, which will build on the Health and Social Care Partnership's local community mental health strategies. And you said that there's a draft currently of the Perth Kinross Community Mental Health Strategy presented, I think, to the IGHB in December. I'm just curious about, given the focus on mental health, I understand there's been the COVID crisis, but if a draft was presented, why is there not an existing community mental health strategy? And why does a draft take so long when something should be, I think as Councillor Wilson was saying, such a high priority issue for all concerned?
So sorry, I shouldn't have said the draft strategy was presented in December. The plans for the development of the draft of a strategy and the early action that had been undertaken, including workshops with stakeholders, was what was presented in December, in order that we would then be developing the strategy beyond that. The development, I mean, I think that the issue in relation to your question around what predated that strategy, and in some respects my appointment, was the strategic commissioning plan that had some ambition in it around how a range of services would be developed. I think it's probably reasonable, though, to say that stakeholders tend not to demand strategy, they demand action, and we have been taking action in the intervening period. The strategy is about setting out our future direction. It's about being clear about how we work with partners. It's scanning some of the challenges that we're experiencing. It's anticipating what the national policy is, and it's thinking about where local policy will take us. That hasn't precluded us from investing significantly in the delivery and development of local mental health services, principally through additional resources we've had from the Scottish Government under Action 15 of the Mental Health Strategy, through our engagement with local third sector organisations and through our local stakeholder group. So I'd wish to reassure Council that whilst we are trying to develop that strategy that will align to our new strategic commissioning plan, that hasn't precluded us from looking at how we can deliver and develop improved services and more responsive services in the intervening period. However, the IJB's, is clearly concerned about overarching strategic direction, setting that direction and applying scrutiny and governance at a strategic level.
Okay, I mean, I think your reassurance about involving the stakeholders and certainly saying that the stakeholders would be looking for action rather than a strategy. Certainly, stakeholders who've contacted me, charities, community representative groups, patients and so on, definitely see the lack of action. So when you start talking about a draft of a plan to develop a strategy, that does kind of sort of may lead people to be concerned about the lack of prioritisation that Councillor Wilson was referring to, but great if there have been actions in the meantime. There's a couple of references in the report and the draft action plan to the Teesside Executive Partners. In fact, they're quite heavily relied on in terms of the NHS Teesside response to the independent inquiry report. But as far as I understand it, the Teesside Executive Partners just decided to come together and had no direction from either NHS Teesside Board or from the Integration Joint Board with responsibility for inpatient mental health. They just decided to come together and put together that statement of intent when the independent inquiry report was published. What's not there, however, is any reference to the Mental Health Alliance, and the Mental Health Alliance was heavily relied on by NHS Teesside last year as being the main plank of their response and ongoing action in response to the independent inquiry. It was really just to seek some sort of assurances around I know you've said this, but just to seek some sort of assurances around the governance roles here. The Mental Health Alliance was taking a role, it was having meetings that all of its attendees, listed attendees from the community hadn't been invited to or even told about, and it never had any terms of reference or any substantive delegation of strategic function from the IJB. Now NHS Teesside are relying on the Teesside Executive Partners. Can we just make sure that the role of elected and non-executive members will be respected in terms of setting strategic direction?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think the Chief Executive wants to reply as well.
I think Gordon has given an affirmative to Councillor Stewart's question, but I think it's also important to recognise that the Chief Executives have strategic management responsibilities for all resources, which includes staffing, and therefore the Teesside Executive Partners was brought together to ensure that things proceed. And picking up on your earlier point, Councillor Stewart, things proceed with pace, and we see a significant difference and improvement to inpatient mental health services and indeed those delivered in the community. So I can absolutely confirm, as the Chief Officer has done, that governance is a particular issue in terms of the work that we're doing around the action plan, and the new director, whether she's interim or substantive, Kate Bell, is fully aware and takes on board the governance concerns and the roles of elected members, both within the council and indeed the members in the IJB. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I thank Gordon Patterson for answering all the questions and for the councillors for putting the questions to him. Now ask Councillor Lyle to move the report, please.
Thank you very much. Deputy Provost, obviously this is, by the nature of the questions, a very important report into the inquiry and mental health, and I thank officers for bringing this report together and for answering the questions in a fulsome and open way. So I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you. Councillor Duff, to second the report, please.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Just happy to formally second it at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As far as I can see, there is no one wishing to make any comment. So with that, we are happy to agree this report. So thank you all very much.
Sorry.
Agreed.
Yes.
Thank you. Now we move on to item 12, where we are agreeing that Councillor Colin Stewart be appointed to a vacant position on the licensing committee. I presume we're all in agreement with that.
Agreed.
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 Thank you.
Agreed.
There will now be a short break before we move into the private session. So we will give the contacts of how we actually go into the private session, because at this point the members of the public will be leaving it.